Hello and welcome to This Week in Plymouth. I'm Donna Rodriguez, your host, and I'm joined as usual by our town manager, Derek Brindisi. Good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. We're taping this on the 13th of June, and there's a lot that's going to be going on that you're going to be talking about in this episode. We have a special an orientation and town meeting preview and presentation night tonight. Next Tuesday, we're going to have a special town meeting, and we will not be having an episode next Monday on the 20th. So we want to fill folks in on everything going on.
Yeah, no, this is probably our special This Week in Plymouth, because I think we're going to focus most of our energy today just talking about preparing for the special town meeting, the different articles, and some of the information I think folks need to understand prior to going to town meeting next week.
And so for tonight, most people will be seeing this after the 13th, but on the 13th there is a combined presentation night and preview night for the special town meeting that includes some orientation for new town meeting members, but it's also great information for all residents in Plymouth about town meeting.
Yeah, so our moderator, Steve Schiaffoletti, he's going to have his orientation night tonight, and that's really to try to educate and inform our town meeting members, which now it's 162 members because we have now 18 precincts. So we do know for a fact that we're going to have a lot of new town meeting members involved at this special town meeting than ever before. So it's the moderator's intention to try to get them up to speed, teach them about what town meeting is and the process involved in leading up to town meeting, and then actually the night itself. So that'll happen this evening, and then after that orientation piece, we're going to start to present the various articles to the town meeting members who are present.
Now, do you want to get into any specific articles in today's episode?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to talk about Article 1. Article 1 is the reason why we're having a special town meeting.
And that's the potential land purchase.
That's right. So I think in previous episodes we talked about the Select Board's intention on acquiring 46 Sandwich Road. This is a piece of property that's currently in the holdings of Holtec. They have a purchase agreement with a local developer for $2.3 million. This property, when the town realized it was up for sale, quickly we moved on it. We negotiated an acquisition price of $3.75 million. The appraised value is approximately $4.2 million. So we're actually, if town meeting approves, we would end up purchasing it for less than what it's actually appraised at. So it's a good investment in and of itself beyond any of the specific uses that we're planning for.
So do you want to get into the uses a little bit? Because I know there's been so much conversation out there in the community and on social media. It's really hard to kind of nail down what is fact, what are some of the reasons behind this purchase. Could we just kind of take it step by step?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's really important to be super clear on why the board wants to acquire this property. Let's be honest, there's a lot of uses that the town could use this property for, but the primary use, what we're discussing at the special town meeting, is to acquire this 25-acre parcel for public safety purposes. So for a couple years now, town meeting, the former fire chief and others have been talking about the need to have to replace Station 1. Station 1's fire headquarters. If you saw video footage of Station 1, you would realize this building is in disrepair. There was a study that was conducted back in 2021 that dropped a pin and identified the Chiltonville neighborhood as the most ideal location for a new fire headquarters. So,
is that because of accessibility to various parts of the town, or more centralized?
It's more centralized location, and what they do is when they do these type of studies, they have response times, NFPA response times. And so if you looked at the study I think would suggest that we actually need 11 fire stations. We know we're never going to have 11 fire stations. So it's like, let's take the existing 7, let's find the best location for them to provide optimal coverage, meeting NFPA standards. And so Station 1 was identified as the Chiltonville area, and this was identified prior to 46 Sandwich Road even being
available.
A conversation.
Okay.
And so I guess to a certain degree we got lucky that this piece of property became available. So that's one of the primary purposes that we really know. So we know for an absolute fact that we're going to be having this conversation in the next 2 years. And so this is an opportunity to acquire the property so that we can go ahead and have the conversation with town meeting members about funding a new fire station. The other purpose, when you listen to Chief Flynn, our police chief, he's already identified in the next, I would say, 7 to 12 years out, that the existing police headquarters on Long Pond Road is already at max capacity. And I believe he said when that building was constructed, there were about 110 employees that worked in that building. There are now 152 employees working in that building. And based upon the growth of this community, we can anticipate we're going to have to add additional police officers over the course of the next 10 years. So the building at Long Pond Road, the police headquarters, is already at max capacity. So we do know in the near future we're going to have a conversation about relocating police headquarters.
And it's interesting that Plymouth is having this conversation right now because so many of the towns around us are having the same conversation, whether it be DPW, police, fire, combined unified public safety buildings, which many towns are going towards now, that so many of our stations were built in the 70s and the 80s into the 90s, and population has really exploded. So meeting the needs is absolutely essential and first priority. But this is a conversation that's going on everywhere right now.
There's no doubt. I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, you look across all the municipalities, and you're 100% correct. It's because of population growth. At our meeting last week, during this conversation on what source of funding will the select board support in order to acquire this, I had done some quick math. I had went back and I looked at the census, and what I realized over the last 8 years, the town of Plymouth the population has grown by 15%. So that's a substantial growth when you think of the trajectory this town is on. If we're another 15% in the next 8 years, we're going to have to add more police officers and more staff to that building.
So the intent would be, at least the planned intent right now, that what the select board is looking at is starting first off with plans to develop a Station 1 for fire with the potential for bringing in police at a later date. There's enough space on that location for both?
Oh, there's plenty of space. There's so much space. Again, it's a 25-acre parcel that we've recognized that this community really respects open space, and so there have been conversations of being able to set aside open space on this footprint as well. So, we think that it's the best of both worlds. We can, we've identified it for public safety purposes, but also know that we could set aside space for recreation purposes as well.
So for town meeting members and residents, is there any, if they were to approve the purchase of this land specifically with the idea that it would potentially be for public safety, are there reasons or chances that wouldn't be approved as a next step? Are there any issues that people need to know about in ensuring that that's how it would be used?
Well, town meeting, they are the legislative body that either approves or disapproves all these types of acquisitions. And so the first step, obviously, is to try to acquire the property first. But then after that, in order to, say, fund a new fire station, we would have to go back to town meeting for an appropriation for that as well. So this is just step one along many different milestones in order to get this location to be a public safety complex. So
what are the reason to do it now is because the land is available, correct?
Yes. So the land became available to us in March. Mm-hmm. The board acted quickly on that. They negotiated a purchase and sale agreement. The reason why it seems hurried really comes down to municipal finance. So $2.2 million or thereabouts that the town has set aside for this acquisition is going to be from free cash. So free cash, think of free cash as like your checking account. You can really use it for any purpose, but because of municipal finance law, you can only use free cash up until June 30th. Once July 1st hits, you have to go recertify all of the money in your checking account. And so that money wouldn't become available again probably until late September, early October. So in order for us to move quickly, we have to be able to take this vote prior to July 1st.
Okay, so that's the reason for making sure it happens in this timeline.
That's right.
Okay.
Right.
So if if the town does not approve, if town meeting does not approve, what would be the next steps?
So if town meeting does not approve this acquisition, there's already a prospective buyer who's a real estate developer who has plans to develop this property into some type of residential complex. There's been ideas of a 55 and older complex, ideas of just single family housing. So I'm not really sure what it will ultimately be if the town doesn't acquire it, but it'll certainly be residential.
And let me just get straight what town meeting will be voting on. Will they be voting on the funding or just approval for the select board to move forward and find funding?
It's actually both.
Okay.
So in order for the town to acquire land, we go to town meeting. So town meeting members, in the article language, it actually gives permission to the select board to go ahead and acquire that land. So that's the first step. They give permission to the select board. Also part of that article is how are they going to acquire that land? What source of funding? I mentioned one source of funding already is free cash, $2.2 million of free cash. There have been other opportunities to for the balance of that, so the balance of approximately $1.4 million. The board has talked about using Arpa funds or just borrowing the additional $1.4 million.
Okay. Now, what are the pros and cons of each, or what has been the discussion? Because I think that's where I've started to hear a lot of confusion or misinformation, and not really quite sure about the decision-making process or how those funds are typically allocated.
So Arpa funds is what we known as like one-time source of funding. So Arpa stands for the American Rescue Plan Act. It was passed by by Congress, I want to say about a year and a half ago. It's trickled down to the local level. The town has received approximately $12 million of Arpa funding so far, and they've set aside some of those dollars for water infrastructure upgrades, sewer infrastructure upgrades, so on and so forth. So the board has discussed the idea of using $1.4 million of Arpa funds to cover the balance of this $3.75 million acquisition. The other idea was to just go ahead and borrow it. So when you borrow money, then it has an effect on your taxes. The Arpa funds will not have an effect on your taxes because think of it as a grant. It's like a separate grant in order to be able to acquire this property.
Now, with the Arpa funds, are there enough in that fund pool for this?
Yeah, so right now we're projecting we have a balance of about $5 million of Arpa funds remaining that can still be dedicated towards very specific uses. We can't use it for anything or everything. It's in the legislation, it's very specific on what we can use it for.
What are some of the typical things that are approved?
So if you read the legislation, you can use it for public safety purposes. Now think about this. This is all in reaction to the recovery from COVID and the pandemic. So Congress identified its use for public safety, to support public safety, to support public health, which makes a lot of sense, and then very specific infrastructure upgrades. So you can use it to upgrade your water or sewer infrastructure, or even broadband. So if we had a section in town that had very weak or no cell coverage, we could use this money to expand broadband as well. And then there's a couple other categories. One other category is if you had very specific demographics out of the underserved population, you could use the money to lift up certain neighborhoods. And then the last designated area is for revenue replacement. So many municipalities during COVID had a reduction in their typical revenue. So in Plymouth, it had an impact because a lot of our revenues are generated on the restaurant industry, and the hotel taxes we receive, the meals taxes we receive. And so those taxes that are really driven because of tourism in this community, they go to the town's general fund, and we use that money in order to offset our operating costs. And because COVID, there wasn't a lot of tourism. A lot of folks weren't going to restaurants. We had a reduction in the revenues during the course of those 2 years. So you can use the ARPA funds to replace some of those lost revenues.
So there's a variety of purposes that the ARPA funds can be used for, and the town, they're not all allocated at this point. The town has the ability to make choices based on need.
Right, and all of those choices must be voted on by the select board at an open meeting. So like I mentioned, we've already used approximately $12 million of that money. Those projects were presented to the select board. The board discussed them, deliberated upon them, and then took a final vote. And then once they were approved, then we went ahead and appropriated the money for the project.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is following the same pattern and path that all of the other approvals have. So this is going in line with the way the town's been managing the ARPA funds all along.
Right. So last week the board discussed using ARPA funds for this purpose, and so now tonight on June 13th they're going to discuss it again. And the reason why they discussed it again was because we initially thought that if we use free cash coupled with ARPA funds, when we went to town meeting, we only needed a majority of the town meeting members to support that in order for it to pass. What we learned after that vote was taken was that even using ARPA funds, we're going to need 2/3 of town meeting members to support this acquisition. So tonight is really to allow the board members to have one more conversation on, does it make sense to use ARPA? Or should we, given the fact that we have to that we have to get a 2/3 approval, should we just borrow the $1.4 million? So, and we need that discussion to take place prior to the orientation and the moderator's town meeting preview, which starts at 6 o'clock.
So that way town meeting members will also be informed as to where the board's position is and where they stand.
That's right, and
to
they'll know
include in their
exactly how we're going to
decision-making.
fund this project.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So for town meeting members or for anybody who wants to watch what is happening on June 13th, and it's two things. It's a Board of Selectmen's meeting as well as an orientation, presentation, and preview night for town meeting. If you're not able to watch live the evening of, they always will be available in replay on PACTV. So if people just go to pactv.org and go to the Plymouth page, they'll be able to find these meetings to be able to watch them prior to town meeting next week also.
Yeah, that's great. No, I'm happy you brought that up, and I would add to that, because I'm sure, I hope, some folks will be watching, this episode.
Absolutely.
They'll certainly have the opportunity, as you described, to, review what happened with the moderators event tonight. And if you still have questions, I would say email me, like I always say every week. So you can email me at dbrindisi, so that's DBRINDISI at plymouth-ma.gov. And if you have questions, generally if you have questions, always email me, but specifically to any one of the articles, I would really encourage folks to email me, ask their questions so we can give them a thoughtful response so that they have all the information they need before they go to town meeting.
And so residents can talk to their town meeting members as well.
Right, and pass that information along. Usually I let folks know, at the end of my emails, forward this along to your caucuses and to the folks that you know. Because although I'm not technically on social media, I know that there's a lot of misinformation that's happening on social media. And oftentimes, if you're not engaged in the conversation, you're listening to individuals on social media that may not have all the facts. And so I would always encourage folks, call me, email me directly to get the facts.
And also, you mentioned caucuses. There are a number of caucuses happening this week. And if people go to the town website, if you just click on the meetings right on the main page, you can see a list of all the meetings that are happening. So folks can find out if there's a caucus for their precinct and be able to participate if they choose.
That's right. That's right.
So now's the time to, to pay attention, to take a look at what's happening and all of the backup data so people can be making informed decisions.
Right. And I would say, I guess, to kind of close out this conversation, that this parcel of land gives us flexibility in future decision making. And it's really a long-term strategic decision that we're trying to make next week so that in years to come, we can really make good, sound decisions for our public safety personnel, which, if we're making good sound decisions for public safety, that translates into great service for our community. And I think that people need to
Absolutely.
understand that this isn't just for our men and women, but it's going to translate into an appropriate response time, which is going to save lives down the road.
And having a new potential public safety building, and if it does eventually become a complex, there are so many opportunities to have police and fire continually working together on a close basis. Well, they already do, but studies are finding that the opportunities to have them together has a positive impact as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking forward to it.
Okay, now we have, that's not the only article, and I know you did want to talk a little bit about Article 2 as well, which is the hometown rule. Do you want to discuss that a bit?
Yeah, so Article 2 is, I want to talk about it because, it's exciting that we're going to be asking our town meeting members to support a home rule petition. We would be the first in the state that has legislation that allows us to have a hybrid town meeting. So right now, the only types of town meetings you can have, either in person or 100% virtual. So as we all have grown and probably appreciate most, is the hybrid model, where if folks want to stay at home because they're more comfortable at home, great. If folks want to, go in person, great too. So this home rule petition, we're going to, submit through our state delegation, assuming town meeting supports it, and then it would be discussed, through the House and then through the Senate. And if approved, our future town meetings could be a hybrid town meeting, which we would be the first in the state for that to happen.
And that, for folks who aren't familiar with the process, this is following two paths. It's the through the state. There's a question of, after the governor's guidelines end on July 15th, if the entire state would extend that to include hybrid meetings. But not every town across the state necessarily wants that. So by choosing home rule option, the town is able to ask the state if they can be the ones to make the decision.
That's exactly right. So this legislation is specifically for the town of Plymouth. Mm-hmm. It gives us the ability to make those decisions on our own and not
no matter what
being
the state
affected
decides
by the
overall.
rest of the state. Right, exactly. And it's great because, again, we would be the first community in Massachusetts to be able to have a hybrid model town meeting.
And Plymouth has done so incredibly well with attendance with the virtual meetings, and with hybrid meetings regularly throughout the week. Just anecdotally, it does appear that a larger number of people participate than necessarily do if it's just a live meeting.
Oh, I think it promotes civic engagement across the board. To your point, we have seen more participants dialing into our every Tuesday select board meetings because they can sit from their home, have dinner, watch the meeting, raise their hand, ask a question, and not have to travel. Especially when we think about it, in a community the size of Plymouth, if you live in South Plymouth and you want to go to a select board meeting, it's a 20-minute drive, go to the meeting, and then 25 minutes home. So it's a long evening. So being able to do this from the enjoyment of your living room makes civic engagement that much easier. And especially with this younger generation, they do everything through their phones and through their laptops. So this legislation, which is now Article 2 at the special town meeting, I think I hope it's approved because I think it's going to put us on a different level.
And I definitely see it continuing to increase participation.
Oh, there's no doubt.
Now, is there anything else you want to touch on with town meeting before we talk about a couple of announcements? Believe it or not, we're running out of time already.
No, I'm just hoping folks, again, get educated, get informed, make a good decision based upon what you think is important for this community. And that's what I just ask folks to do.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. You did have a couple of announcements you wanted to share with us. Something going on with the Board of Health. There's an award.
Yeah, so last week, the coalition, the Community Prevention Coalition, gave a Heroes Award to our Board of Health and our Director of Public Health, Karen Keene. And it was really because of the countless hours they put in for the 2 years of COVID. I mean, they had to make some really tough decisions that, it was probably a split divide in the community around some of the decisions around mask wearing, closing restaurants, opening them. And so they were recognized by the Community Prevention Coalition for the great work that they've done, and hopefully they can take a rest for a little while. I'm seeing the numbers starting to drop, but I just wanted to acknowledge them for the work that they've done. and they will continue to do for the town.
And in addition to making very challenging decisions, they've been so out there in getting information out to the public. They had shows every day for seven days a week. They were doing COVID updates at the beginning and working with the town moderator and other folks in town government.
It was a lot of work.
It's amazing what they have done. So congratulations
to
everybody.
to them.
And also, you wanted to talking about ARPA funds. You do have an announcement for some.
So next Wednesday, June 22nd, out at the airport, there's going to be a press conference. The Plymouth County Commissioners has awarded the town $2.2 million from ARPA, from their earmark from ARPA, so that we can upgrade the wastewater treatment plant out at the airport.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, again, that's $2 million that we would not have had. We don't have to raise the rates. We don't have to raise taxes because we're able to get this money through the county. So we're going to have a nice press conference acknowledging the county's support, and then start that work right away.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we'll look forward to being there, and we'll be able to talk about that in the next episode. Do you have any final comments?
No, other than, I just really hope folks can reach out to me or reach out to any one of our staff if they have questions for the town meeting.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching for this episode of This Week in Plymouth.